They call it forced leave because softer words hurt less. Paper says clean. Hallways say don't linger. Tonight isn't supposed to matter. The car idles where people keep moving. Footsteps, engines, light. Officer_EC watches reflections instead of faces. His hand rests on the harness out of habit. Pressure, stillness. K9_Shadow sits upright, not tense, not relaxed, listening. The world keeps flowing past them, unaware. Then the rhythm breaks. Not a sound. A gap where sound should be. K9_Shadow's ears adjust. Once. Again. Officer_EC doesn't move, but his breathing changes. Nothing looks wrong. That's the problem. Because whatever just registered didn't announce itself, and it didn't wait for permission. They said forced leave like it was a kindness, like a hand on the shoulder, a warm mug, a gentle instruction to breathe. But Officer Ethan Cole knew what it really meant. Step away before you break in public. Before the department had to decide whether they were protecting the community from criminals or from him. The city had scrubbed his name clean on paper. No suspension, no formal discipline. Just administrative leave pending review, the kind that lived in a gray zone where people stopped making eye contact in the hallway. His badge still worked on the doors. His radio still clicked to life if he turned it on. But the unspoken rule was louder than any dispatcher. Don't touch anything that can touch you back. Tonight, he wasn't supposed to be out. Tonight was supposed to be quiet. That was the lie he told himself as he sat in the driver's seat of the cruiser, parked under a flickering sodium lamp near the riverfront maintenance lot. The windshield held a faint sheen of mist. The air tasted like metal and algae and the first breath of a storm rolling in from the Gulf. Beside him, K9 Shadow sat upright in the passenger well, shoulders square, ears rotating in small calibrations, an animal built from intelligence and restraint. Shadow didn't pant, didn't fidget. He watched the world like it was a set of questions, and every sound was an answer that might save a life. Ethan's hand rested on the dog's harness strap, thumb tracing the worn stitching. It was a grounding habit, the same way some people counted rosary beads. Shadow leaned, just barely, a quiet pressure against Ethan's forearm. Not affection in the human sense, alignment. A reminder, you are not alone in this car. You're not alone in your head. Just a drive, Ethan murmured. Shadow's eyes didn't blink, but his tail made a single controlled tap against the floor mat. The river beyond the chain-link fence moved black and slow, swollen from recent rains. Across the water, the floodwall rose in a long concrete spine, painted with faded murals and layered graffiti, bright colors hiding old stains. The city built that wall after the last big surge and then pretended it made them safe forever. Infrastructure was like that. It did its job quietly, until it didn't, and then everyone asked who'd been asleep at the wheel. Ethan had spent his entire career learning the difference between quiet and safe. They were never the same. The radio on the dash hissed, static without a call sign. Ethan had turned it down low, more for the comfort of noise than information. In the stillness, even the hum of electricity felt like company. Shadow's head shifted toward the floodwall. A fraction, then another. His ears went forward like two blades. Ethan felt the change before he fully saw it, like a current in the air. Shadow rose to standing, body stiffening, nose lifting. His lips tightened at the corners, not a snarl, not fear, focus. "What is it?" Ethan asked, voice quiet. Shadow's gaze locked beyond the fence, toward the base of the floodwall where an old drainage cut disappeared into shadow. The dog made a low sound in his throat, so soft it barely registered as audible. Ethan's own skin tightened. There were plenty of reasons for a K9 to alert near water. Raccoons, feral cats, the ghost smells of trash and fish rot. But Shadow didn't track like prey. He wasn't scanning for movement. He was listening. The dog's head tilted, micro-adjusting to triangulate. His nostrils flared once, twice. Then his nails clicked on the plastic as he leaned toward the passenger door, a contained urgency in his posture. Ethan's pulse slowed into a familiar shape, that soldier calm that came right before violence. A sound reached Ethan then, so faint he almost dismissed it as the wind threading through broken fencing. A thin, intermittent hum. Not musical, not natural. A vibration that came and went like someone toggling a switch too quickly to be sure of what you heard. Shadow's body trembled, not with fear, but with the tension of a trained animal trying not to break command. Ethan stared at the drainage cut beneath the flood wall. The mouth of it was covered by a rusted grate, half buried in silt and weeds. The concrete around it was darker, wet with seepage. The hum came again, brief, then gone. "Okay," Ethan whispered. "Okay, partner, show me." He opened the door. The night air slapped him, damp and sharp. Across the lot, somewhere in the city, a siren wailed and faded. Ethan walked to the fence, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. Shadow paced at his heel with perfect discipline, but Ethan could feel the dog's pull toward the floodwall like a magnet. The maintenance gate wasn't locked, it rarely was. The city trusted rust and neglect more than padlocks. Ethan slipped through and approached the floodwall's base, flashlight in hand. Its beam sliced across graffiti and damp concrete, catching insect wings and tiny drifting flecks of mist. Shadow moved ahead, nose down now, drawing a line straight to the drainage cut. He stopped, planted, and stared at the grate. Then he looked back at Ethan, direct, insistent, like a colleague demanding a warrant be served. The hum flickered again, stronger this time, and with it came something else. A faint tap. Tap, tap. Not a bird, not water. More like someone striking metal with a fingernail in a pattern that wasn't random. Ethan's throat went tight. The flood wall had maintenance corridors running behind it, a maze of reinforced concrete and access panels designed for inspection crews. Most were sealed, most were forgotten. Forgotten spaces were where bad things grew. His flashlight found a small metal placard near the drainage cut, half obscured by grime. Flood control, maintenance access. Below it, a padlock bracket stood empty, the metal loop bent, as if it had been pried open and never repaired. Shadow's ears flicked at the tap again. The dog's entire body held a ready stillness, like a spring loaded but not released. "Jesus!" Ethan breathed, and the word came out like steam. He crouched, inspecting the grate. Rust, silt, a thin chain wound through it, broken. No fresh footprints in the mud, no tire tracks, nothing obvious. But Shadow didn't care about obvious. Shadow cared about truth. Ethan tested the grate with a gloved hand. It shifted, not bolted down, just heavy and wedged. He set his feet, braced, and lifted with a grunt. The metal screamed against concrete. Shadow didn't flinch. He waited, patient, intent. The grate came free enough to create an opening. Cold air rolled out like a breath from underground, stale, damp, carrying the smell of oil and old river water. The hum fluttered again inside the darkness. Ethan aimed his flashlight into the cut. The beam revealed a narrow passage sloping down, water trickling along its center. The walls were slick concrete. A few feet in, the ceiling lowered and the space widened into a crawl-height corridor. Shadow leaned forward, nose to the air, then looked back at Ethan again. Permission. Ethan swallowed. Every policy memo in his brain screamed, "Don't." Every instinct in his bones said, "Move." "All right," he whispered. "One look. That's it." Shadow entered first, like a shadow living up to his name, quiet, controlled, precise. Ethan followed, ducking his head beneath the low opening. The temperature dropped immediately, as if the world above had never existed. The corridor swallowed sound. Even Ethan's breathing seemed too loud. The tap came again, closer now. Tap, tap, tap. Shadow stopped, head swinging toward the right wall. There was an access panel there, metal, riveted, with a hand-wheel latch. The paint was blistered. The edges were sealed with old caulk that had cracked and flaked away. And there, near the bottom seam, was a small gap, barely wide enough for air. The hum pulsed from behind it. Ethan put his ear close. Silence. Then, a faint burst of static, a whisper of transmission without words. His stomach tightened. Shadow's nose pressed against the seam. The dog exhaled once, then stiffened. Ethan grabbed the latch and turned. The hand wheel resisted, stuck with corrosion, but he forced it, muscles straining. Metal squealed. The seal broke with a wet pop. He pulled the panel open. Inside was darkness and a cavity that smelled like wet insulation. His flashlight beam swept across pipes and wiring, then stopped on something that didn't belong. A plastic evidence pouch, yellowed with age, wedged behind a conduit like someone had shoved it there and hoped the world would forget. Shadow let out a single sharp huff, confirmation. Ethan reached in and pulled the pouch free. Water dripped from it in slow threads. The pouch had been sealed. Once. The seal strip was broken. Still, the contents were visible through clouded plastic. A folded piece of paper, a torn ID photo, and a metal clip. Ethan's fingers went cold. He hadn't touched evidence in weeks. Not officially, not without someone watching his hands for tremors, watching his face for cracks. Now he held a piece of truth like a live wire. He aimed the flashlight onto the photo. It was a woman. Mid-30s maybe. Uniform. A calm, stern face that belonged to someone who understood systems and still believed they could be made right. Ethan's brain didn't give him a name. It gave him a sensation, a childhood smell of coffee and starch. A hand pressing his shoulder in a doorway. A voice saying, "Stay behind me." His heart lurched like a vehicle hitting ice. "What the hell?" Ethan whispered. Shadow looked up at him, eyes reflecting the beam like twin embers. Ethan unfolded the paper inside the pouch carefully, fingertips delicate, as if the ink might dissolve at his touch. The page was a ledger fragment. Numbers, account codes, dates. Along the margin, written in a crisp hand, Veteran Aid, Disaster Relief Allocation. Below it, a notation in red ink, "Do not let this drown." Ethan's throat tightened until it hurt. Shadow's ears snapped toward the corridor entrance. Ethan froze. He listened. Nothing. But Shadow's body had changed again. High, rigid readiness, the posture of a dog who could hear a liar blink. Ethan turned his flashlight beam back toward the opening and caught something, a thin shimmer on the damp concrete. Fresh water disturbance. A ripple moving against the trickle flow like something had displaced air somewhere deeper in the corridor. Ethan's pulse hit hard. He didn't think about policy now. He thought about one rule Shadow had never broken. If the dog says it's real, it's real. "Back," Ethan breathed, and Shadow pivoted instantly, moving with him as they retreated toward the drainage mouth. Ethan didn't run. Running made noise, noise made panic, panic made mistakes, but his muscles were coiled tight. The hum faded behind them, like a signal choosing silence again. When they climbed out beneath the floodwall and the night air hit Ethan's face, it felt like surfacing from underwater. He shoved the grate back into place as best he could, hands shaking just enough to be honest. Shadow stood beside him, steady as a post. Ethan stared at the evidence pouch in his hand. The city above was loud with life and ignorance. The river rolled on like it didn't care. And somewhere under the floodwall, someone or something had tried to keep a secret alive long enough for the right person to find it. Ethan exhaled slowly. Forced leave or not, this was a call. And Ethan Cole had never been good at ignoring calls. He didn't go to the station. Not yet. He drove to his small apartment instead, parked in the back lot where the security light was broken, and carried the evidence pouch inside like it might explode if he set it down too hard. Shadow followed without being told, nails clicking softly on the stairs, body still in working mode. Ethan fed him water first. Routine mattered. Ritual kept the mind from splitting. Then Ethan cleared his kitchen table. He laid the evidence pouch in the center and stared at it for a long time without touching it again. The yellowed plastic glowed faintly under the overhead light, like an artifact pulled from a shipwreck. The torn photo looked up at him from the murk. Ethan's half-memory kept scratching at the inside of his skull. It wasn't a full flashback. It was worse, an almost remembered truth that refused to take shape. He reached for his phone and stopped. If he called Captain Hayes, he'd be dragging her into something that could blow back on both of them. Maria was pragmatic, empathetic, and political enough to survive. But there were limits to what even she could cover without becoming the headline. If he called Deputy Reed, Lucas would answer, no matter the hour. Lucas always answered. Energetic rookie, competent, trying too hard not to disappoint his heroes. Ethan hated what that kind of loyalty could cost. If he called Dr. Lena Moore, quiet, brilliant, always half in her head, she'd ask for chain of custody and lab validation and reasons. She'd be right. And Ethan might not survive how right she'd be. He set the phone down and opened the pouch more carefully, documenting with photos on his own device. Timestamp, lighting, angles, old habits. Chain of custody wasn't just a legal concept, it was Ethan's way of staying sane, a timeline you could defend. He unfolded the ledger page fully. The codes weren't police codes, not standard municipal accounts. More like old federal grant accounting, disaster allocations, vendor dispersals, sub-accounts. At the bottom was a string of numbers repeated twice, highlighted in faded marker. Ethan wrote it down. Shadow lay by the door, head on his paws, eyes open. His gaze tracked Ethan like a metronome, not watchful in the way of surveillance, watchful in the way of partnership. "I'm here. Keep going." Ethan leaned back, rubbing his face. The overhead light flickered once, then steadied. And his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at it. A cold line drew itself down his spine. He didn't answer. The buzzing stopped. A text arrived. "Stop digging, Ethan." No emoji, no signature. Just his name like it belonged to whoever typed it. Ethan's jaw tightened. His phone buzzed again, another message, immediate. "You're on leave for a reason. Don't prove them right." Shadow lifted his head at the vibration sound, ears tilting. Ethan didn't blink for a full 5 seconds. The room felt smaller. The air thickened. Because that wasn't a random threat. That was intimate. Someone knew the exact shape of the blade the department held over his neck. Ethan stood, walked to his blinds, and peeked through. The parking lot sat empty under the broken light. The street beyond was quiet. A dog barked somewhere far off, then stopped. Ethan turned back to the table, and for the first time since the night under the floodwall, he felt it fully. Not fear, expectation. Like the city itself was waiting to see what he'd do next. Ethan picked up his phone and typed one message, one name. "Maria. Need you? Not official." He hesitated, then added, "Shadow found something that wasn't supposed to exist." He hit send. Shadow's tail thumped once. Ethan looked down at him and spoke softly like a vow. "We do this clean." Captain Maria Hayes didn't call him back. She showed up. Not in a cruiser, not in uniform. Maria arrived in an older sedan with the kind of I'm-off-the-clock jacket that still sat like authority on her shoulders. She stepped into Ethan's apartment as if she'd been there before, even if she hadn't, and her eyes took in the room with the same quick sweep she used at a crime scene. Then she looked at Shadow. Shadow stood calm and silent and met her gaze without a single wag. Not hostile, not friendly, just present. Maria gave the slightest nod to the dog first, like that was the proper order of respect. Then she turned to Ethan. "Show me." Ethan didn't talk. Talking made it sound like paranoia. Talking made it sound like a story. He slid the evidence pouch across the kitchen table. Maria's hand stayed still for a moment, like she was weighing the gravity before she let it touch her skin. "You said Shadow found this under the floodwall," she finally said, voice low. Ethan nodded. "Maintenance corridor." "And you opened an access panel." Ethan nodded again. Maria's gaze sharpened. "You understand what that means for your leave status." "I understand," Ethan said. His tone was even, controlled. Maria stared at the torn photo. Something in her expression shifted, not emotion exactly. Recognition of danger. "Okay," she said, and her voice dropped into her command register. "We're going to handle this like professionals, even if the department wants to pretend you don't exist right now." She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, wrote down the time and date, wrote Ethan Cole, physical possession. "You took photos?" she asked. Ethan slid his phone over. Maria scrolled. She didn't smile. She didn't praise him. She just nodded once. "Good." Shadow's ears flicked at the word. Maria looked down at the dog again as if acknowledging what she already knew. Without Shadow, none of this happens. Ethan watched her examine the ledger fragment. Maria's fingers hovered close but didn't smudge the brittle paper. "These codes," she said, "aren't city accounts." "No," Ethan replied. "Feels like federal grants." Maria's eyes moved to the margin note. "Do not let this drown." "That's a hell of a thing to write," she murmured. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Maria's gaze snapped up. "That happening all night?" Ethan nodded once. He didn't need to show her the texts, but he did anyway. Maria read them and exhaled slowly through her nose, the way she did when she was forcing her anger to behave. "Someone knows where you are," she said. "Someone knows I'm on leave," Ethan answered. Maria's jaw tightened. "Everyone knows you're on leave, but this—" She held the phone a fraction higher. "This is targeted. This is a hand on your throat." Shadow gave a low sound, barely there. Agreement. Maria set the phone down. We're not bringing this to the station yet." Ethan didn't argue. He already knew why. If he walked into the station waving an evidence pouch and a conspiracy ledger, the narrative would write itself. Unstable cop on leave claims a secret plot, and the people who wanted to bury whatever this was would thank him for delivering the shovel. Maria leaned back. "We do it the right way, quietly." Ethan nodded. Maria continued. "That means Dr. Lena Moore." Ethan's shoulders loosened by a fraction. "She'll demand custody." "She should," Maria said, "and she'll get it when we're ready. But if this is real, Lena's the one who can make it unarguable." Shadow shifted and sat, posture perfect, like he understood the word proof. Maria glanced at Ethan. "Where was this corridor exactly?" Ethan pulled up a map on his phone, panned to the riverfront, the floodwall, the drainage cut. Maria studied it. "That corridor, those maintenance routes aren't on public plans." "That's why it felt wrong," Ethan said. Maria's gaze went distant for a moment, as if connecting it to something older. Then she refocused. "Ethan!" She said his name like a warning. "If we do this, they will come at you the way they already are. They'll use your leave, they'll use your mental health, they'll use Shadow if they can." Ethan's hand rested on Shadow's harness. "They won't take him." Maria nodded once. "Then don't give them an opening." Ethan stared at the ledger again. Codes, transfers, and that torn photo, a woman in uniform, eyes steady. "I recognize her," Ethan said quietly, "but I don't know from where." Maria's expression softened just enough to show empathy. Trauma does that. It puts memories in boxes and hides the keys. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't like the word trauma out loud. Maria stood. "I'm going to call Lena from my car, not from your place. And you—" She pointed at Ethan's phone. "Turn it off, now." Ethan complied. Maria left and shut the door behind her gently, like she didn't want the building to hear her. Ethan watched Shadow pace toward the window and stare out between the blinds. The dog's body went still. Ethan stepped beside him, looked. Across the street, a dark sedan sat under a tree, not parked like a neighbor, not idling like a rideshare, just sitting. The driver's seat was occupied, face turned toward Ethan's building. Ethan's pulse didn't spike, it flattened, the old calm. He whispered, "We're being watched." Shadow's low growl vibrated in his chest, not loud enough to alert the building, just enough to tell Ethan, "Confirmed." Ethan didn't move the blind, he didn't wave, he didn't confront. He let the watchers stare at empty glass. Then he walked to the kitchen table and began copying every number from the ledger fragment into his notebook with steady handwriting. Because the first rule when someone tries to steal your truth is this: make it exist in more than one place. When Dr. Lena Moore arrived, it was already past midnight. She didn't come in with drama. She came in with a messenger bag and the kind of tired eyes that had spent too many nights staring at fluorescent-lit evidence. Lena's hair was pulled back. No makeup, no softness. She looked like pure thought wrapped in a human body. She entered, saw the evidence pouch, and didn't touch it. "Whose custody?" she asked immediately. Maria answered, "Ethan's, logged with me as witness. Photos timestamped." Lena's gaze cut to Ethan. "You're on leave." Ethan held her eyes. "I know." Lena stared another beat, then exhaled. "Show me the chain." Maria slid her notebook over. Lena read the time entries, the location notes, the photo references. Then she nodded once. "Okay, not perfect, but not sloppy." That was high praise from Lena Moore. Lena pulled on gloves and carefully lifted the ledger fragment. She read the red note. Then she examined the torn photo and paused. Her eyes narrowed. "This paper stock, this isn't modern municipal print. This looks like late 60s, early 70s government run." Ethan felt a quiet jolt. "So it's not fake." "It could still be fake," Lena said, blunt, "but it would be an expensive, obsessive fake, and people don't usually go to that trouble for fun." Maria leaned forward. "Can you validate the ink and paper?" "Yes," Lena said, "but not here." Ethan's stomach tightened. "The lab." Lena looked at him like he'd just said a swear word in church. "Not the department lab, not yet." Maria nodded. "Agreed." Lena continued. "If this is tied to federal disaster relief, we're not just dealing with a city issue. We're dealing with a historical machine. Those machines don't like being questioned." Shadow lay near Ethan's boots, eyes up, listening to Lena's voice like it mattered. Lena glanced at the dog briefly, and something almost like respect flickered in her expression. "Your dog found this," she said. "He did," Ethan replied. Lena nodded once. "Then we assume it was hidden on purpose." Maria's voice was calm. "What do these codes mean?" Lena pulled a small magnifier from her bag. "Some are routing identifiers, some look like vendor dispersals, but the repetition here—" She tapped the highlighted number string. "That's either an account key or a location code." Ethan's phone was off, but Maria's buzzed in her jacket pocket. She checked it, a single text, from an unknown number. Maria read it, then her face hardened. "What?" Ethan asked. Maria turned the screen toward him. "Tell Ethan to stop. You can't protect him from what he is." Lena's expression didn't change, but her eyes went colder. "They're reaching you now." Maria's jaw clenched. "They're confident." Ethan's voice stayed flat. "They're close." Shadow's head lifted, ears pricked. Then, from the hallway outside Ethan's apartment door, very faint, came a sound. A soft scrape, like something brushing the doormat. Ethan moved without thinking. He took 2 steps to the door, silent, and placed his hand on the knob. Maria's hand caught his wrist. "Don't," she whispered. Ethan's eyes met hers. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He was calculating. Maria shook her head slightly. "We don't step into their narrative?" Ethan listened. The hallway was silent again. No footsteps retreating. No elevator ding. Just empty building air. Lena stood and walked to the door, not with bravado, with precision. She crouched, looked at the bottom seam, then reached into her bag and produced a small handheld mirror. She angled it and peered under the door. Then she straightened. "There's something out there," she said softly. Maria's voice tightened. "What?" Lena opened the door 1 inch, just enough. A folded piece of paper slid inward, as if someone had placed it there and walked away long ago. Lena picked it up with gloved fingers and unfolded it. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten, shaky, but deliberate. "Return it to the river." Ethan stared at the words until they blurred. Maria's voice was sharp. "This is escalation." Lena looked up. "This is instruction. They're not guessing what you have. They know what you have." Ethan's brain worked fast. They want it back where it came from. Maria nodded slowly. "So, whoever hid it expected someone might try to retrieve it." Lena's gaze pinned Ethan. "And whoever is threatening you has access to your number, your address, and Maria's." Maria's eyes flicked toward the window. Shadow growled low. Ethan looked through the blinds again. The dark sedan across the street was gone. In its place, down the block, a different vehicle sat, an unmarked SUV. Not police, just present. Ethan's voice stayed even. "We moved the evidence tonight." Maria's tone was immediate. "Where?" Ethan looked at the ledger fragment, then at Shadow, then at Maria and Lena. "The only way to keep it from being stolen," Ethan said quietly, "is to make it officially real before morning." Lena's jaw tightened. "That means documentation, duplicates, and a secure handoff." Maria's eyes narrowed. "And a person inside the station who can move without raising flags." Ethan didn't say the name. He didn't have to. Maria already reached for her phone. "Lucas," she said into it when he answered. "You're awake. Good. I need you to do something. Not in the system." Deputy Lucas Reed arrived 20 minutes later, breathless, jacket half-zipped, hair messy like he'd sprinted from bed. He stepped into Ethan's apartment and stopped when he saw Lena and Maria and the evidence pouch. His normal humor didn't show up. That was how Ethan knew this wasn't just excitement for the rookie. It was fear. Lucas swallowed. "Captain, what's going on?" Maria didn't sugarcoat. "We found something that's been buried for a long time, and somebody doesn't want it found." Lucas's eyes flicked to Ethan. "You're on leave." Ethan's tone was dry. "I'm aware." Lucas moved closer and looked at the ledger fragment. "What is that? A bank statement?" Lena replied, "A piece of a long-gone pipeline, money meant for people who needed it. Rerouted." Lucas's face tightened. "Like corruption." Maria nodded. "And it's touching Ethan right now." Lucas glanced at Ethan's phone. Off. "Someone threatening you?" Ethan said nothing. He just slid the note across. "Return it to the river." Lucas read it, then looked up, eyes wide. "What the hell?" Maria leaned forward. "Lucas, I need you to pull one thing. Quietly. No computer. No logins." Lucas nodded quickly. Whatever. Maria tapped the repeated number string Ethan had copied. This, I want to know if it matches anything in our old case files. Floodwall construction, riverfront contracts, anything. Lucas frowned. That's archives, basement storage. Maria's voice was steady. Exactly. Lucas swallowed. I can do that. Ethan watched him carefully. Lucas was competent. But competence didn't protect you from being used as a pawn. Ethan spoke low. If you feel watched, you leave. You don't push. Lucas nodded, trying to look brave. I'm not a kid, Ethan. Ethan's gaze didn't soften. You're still a target if they think you're useful. Lucas nodded again, quieter. Yeah, okay. Maria stood. You go now. Lena, make duplicates. Ethan. Ethan was already packing. He wasn't just stuffing things into a bag. He was moving with the clean efficiency of a man who'd learned the cost of disorganization. Lena took photos of the ledger fragment with a specialized camera attachment. She photographed the paper grain, the ink bleed, the tear patterns. Then she sealed the fragment and photo in a new evidence bag and wrote, in black marker, Temp Custody, Capt. M. Hayes. Witness, Dr. L. Moore. Ethan watched her and felt something like relief. Not because he trusted the system, because he trusted people. People with codes. Shadow stayed close, body aligned with Ethan's knee, as if anticipating movement. Maria looked at Ethan. You and Shadow are going back to the floodwall. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Why? Maria nodded toward the note. If they want it returned, then the corridor matters. There might be more, or there might be a reason they can't retrieve what's still there without you. Lena's voice was quiet. The person who wrote, "Do not let this drown," hid it where water could destroy it. That means they were desperate, or they believed it was safer there than anywhere else. Ethan's jaw tightened. Or they believed someone would find it who could listen. Shadow's ears flicked at the word. Maria's tone hardened. Then we use that. We don't chase ghosts, Ethan. We follow physical proof. Ethan nodded once. Outside, the wind picked up. A storm was still building somewhere beyond the skyline. Ethan grabbed his jacket. We go now. Maria stepped between him and the door. No hero moves. If you go down there, you go with Lucas and me on comms. Ethan's gaze stayed steady. You can't be on comms if we don't use the radio. Maria's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Fine, burner phones. Lena pulled 2 cheap prepaid phones from her bag like she'd expected this. I keep them for witness protection situations, she said flatly. Lucas stared. Doc, who are you? Lena didn't blink. A woman who doesn't trust systems that claim to be clean. Maria took one phone and handed the other to Ethan. Check in every 15. If you miss one, I call it in officially and burn the whole thing in daylight. Ethan nodded. Understood? Shadow rose. They moved. The riverfront lot was empty when Ethan and Shadow returned, but the quiet felt different now, not peaceful. Watched. Ethan parked under the same broken light and killed the engine. The city hum surrounded him like distant machinery. The flood wall stood in shadow, graffiti colors muted under the night. Shadow's nose pressed to the air the moment they exited the cruiser. He led Ethan straight to the drainage cut. The grate was still there, still crooked from Ethan's earlier rush. Ethan's flashlight beam swept the ground, and he saw it immediately. A fresh boot print in the mud near the wall, half filled with rainwater. Not from Ethan's boots, not from maintenance staff. It was too clean, too deliberate, placed like a message. Shadow sniffed it and growled low. Ethan whispered, they were here. He reached down, lifted the grate again, and dropped into the corridor. Cold air swallowed him. Shadow moved ahead. The deeper they went, the less Ethan could hear the city. The corridor narrowed, and the trickle of water became the main sound. A drip, a slap of slow current. Ethan kept his breathing controlled. Shadow stopped at the access panel again. Ethan opened it. The cavity where the evidence pouch had been was now empty. But something else sat in its place, a small plastic bag, sealed. Inside, a single folded note. Ethan's hands went cold as he pulled it free. He opened it. You think you're the first to try? Shadow's growl deepened. Ethan stared at the words, and in the hum of that underground space, he understood something crucial. This wasn't one crime. This was a machine. And Ethan, on leave, with a dog and a thin thread of evidence, had just put his hand into its gears. He didn't back out. He photographed the note. He pocketed it. And he turned to Shadow, voice low, steady. "Find the rest." Shadow stopped at a seam Ethan hadn't noticed before. Not the access panel. A hairline crack in the concrete where two wall sections met. Shadow pressed his nose to it and exhaled. Then he pawed once. Light, controlled. A "here" signal. Ethan swept the flashlight beam across it. The seam was darker, damp with seepage. And there, almost hidden, was a small square of metal embedded in the wall, like an old maintenance latch. No signage, no obvious purpose. Ethan's stomach tightened. He pried at it with his knife. The metal plate popped free, revealing a narrow cavity behind it. Inside was a second sealed pouch, smaller than the first, and wrapped in a layer of plastic like someone had learned the river's habits the hard way. Ethan pulled it out, heart pounding in a disciplined rhythm. Shadow sat beside him, ears up, steady. Ethan's flashlight cut through the cloudy plastic. Inside, a folded document and a tiny strip of photographic film sealed in wax paper. Ethan's breath caught. This wasn't random. This was a cache, a breadcrumb trail. He didn't open it here. He didn't trust the corridor anymore. He retreated, climbed out beneath the floodwall, and hurried to the cruiser. Shadow jumped in, posture tense. Ethan dialed Maria on the burner. She answered immediately. "Status." Ethan kept his voice low. Shadow found another pouch. Different location in the corridor. Film inside. Silence on the line, just a breath, the sound of Maria processing. Then, "Bring it to Lena. Now?" Ethan didn't argue. He drove. Lena's lab wasn't a lab, not official. It was a small workspace in the back of a private consulting office, the kind that existed because Lena had learned long ago that truth needed a place to survive outside institutional walls. Maria was already there when Ethan arrived, pacing. Lucas sat in a chair, pale-faced, clutching an archive folder like it was radioactive. The moment Ethan stepped in, Lucas blurted, "Captain, it matches." Maria's head snapped up. "Say that again." Lucas slid the folder forward. "The number string. It matches an old riverfront contract code from the floodwall build. The same code appears in a sealed file from the archives labeled," he swallowed, "Veteran Relief Oversight. Closed." Ethan's chest tightened. Why would Veteran Relief be in floodwall archives? Lucas shook his head. "It shouldn't be. That's the point." Maria's voice was low. "That means the floodwall corridor was used for more than maintenance." Lena's eyes flicked to Ethan's second pouch. "Open it. Here." Ethan handed it over. Lena gloved up and carefully unsealed it, revealing a folded page and the film strip. The page was typed. Old paper. Faint carbon copy marks. At the top, in faded block letters, "Disaster Relief, Veteran Aid, Disbursement." Audit below it, a signature line was blacked out, redacted. But one word remained visible beside the black ink, like the marker had dried out halfway. "Kane." Maria inhaled sharply. Ethan went still. Lena's voice was quiet. "This is the name that repeats." Maria's jaw clenched. "We need confirmation, not instinct." Lena lifted the film strip to the light. Tiny frames, grainy. One showed stacks of paper, another showed a man's face beside a signboard. Another showed a woman in uniform holding a folder and staring directly at the camera, expression controlled but urgent. Ethan's stomach dropped. It was the same woman from the torn photo. And in his mind, a memory finally opened its box. A little boy, a hallway, a woman kneeling in front of him, smoothing his collar, whispering, "If anyone asks, you don't know me. You hear me? You don't know me." Ethan's breath hitched. Maria noticed. "Ethan!" Ethan didn't look away from the film. "I remember her." Lena's eyes sharpened. "From where?" Ethan's voice went rough. "From before I had language for memory." Maria's face softened a fraction. "You don't have to solve that right now." But Lena spoke anyway, precise and cutting through emotion. The person who hid this expected a specific person to find it, someone they trusted to keep watch. Lucas whispered, "Like a cop." Maria nodded slowly. "Or someone who would become one." Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The room was silent except for Shadow's breathing. Lena set the film down carefully. We can develop this. We can extract metadata from the paper and ink. We can prove age and origin. Maria leaned forward. And then we push it officially. Lucas swallowed. Captain, if we push it officially, they'll know it's real. Maria's eyes were steady. They already know. They're trying to keep it from surfacing. Ethan spoke, voice low. So we surface it where they can't drown it. Maria nodded. Exactly. Outside, thunder rolled. A storm was coming. And suddenly the story's logic locked into place like a bolt. If the floodwall corridor had been a hiding place, then the danger wasn't just human. It was water. Ethan looked at Maria. If there's more in there and a storm hits? Maria finished. It's gone. Lucas's voice cracked. And if they've been watching the corridor, they might try to retrieve the rest during the storm when no one's out. Lena nodded. Or destroy it. Ethan's gaze went distant for a second, calculating. Then he looked down at Shadow. Shadow's ears were forward, ready. Ethan's voice was a vow. We go back before the surge. Maria's tone was firm. Not alone. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't have to. They all understood. The next scene was already set. The floodwall corridor, rising water, and the truth bolted somewhere above the line where the river could reach. The storm didn't arrive politely. It came like an argument slamming into a room. Wind first, then rain, then the kind of pressure shift that made streetlights flicker and windows tremble as if the city itself had a pulse. By the time Ethan, Shadow, Maria, Lena, and Lucas reached the riverfront lot, the sky was a bruised lid hanging low over the floodwall. Rain fell in hard, slanted lines, stinging against skin and turning the gravel underfoot into slick, shifting grit. Maria stood beside the cruiser, hood up, face set. She looked like leadership in weather, pragmatic, empathetic, and unwilling to let fear drive the steering wheel. 15 minutes, she said, raising her voice over the rain. That's the window before the surge pushes into the low channels. After that, the corridor becomes a bathtub. Lena adjusted the strap of her bag. The corridor is already wet. If we're wrong about a cache, we lose time. Lucas swallowed, glancing toward the floodwall like it might bite him. If we're right, Ethan cut him off, calm. Then we don't waste breath. Shadow stood at Ethan's side, rain beating on his coat, eyes bright and intent. The dog didn't care about thunder. Thunder was just noise. Shadow cared about patterns, about what didn't belong. Ethan checked Shadow's harness, snugged the strap, then looked at each of them, one by one. This isn't a raid, Ethan said, voice steady. No hero stuff. We move like a search team. We find what's there. We get out. Maria nodded. Lucas, you stay near the entrance. Your eyes and time. If water rises faster than we expect, you call it. Lucas's face went pale, but he nodded hard. Yes, ma'am. Maria looked at Lena. You're here for documentation, not bravery. Lena's eyes were flat. I didn't come for bravery. Ethan's gaze shifted to Shadow. You lead. Shadow's tail made a single controlled tap. Then Ethan moved. They crossed the lot toward the drainage cut at the base of the floodwall. Wind shoved at their backs. Rain hammered the concrete. The river beyond the fence rolled darker and higher, swollen and impatient. Ethan lifted the rusted grate. The smell that rolled out wasn't just damp concrete anymore. It was river breath, heavier, angrier. He dropped into the corridor first, boots splashing in shallow water. Shadow followed, silent as a thought. Behind them, Maria and Lena ducked in. Lucas stayed at the mouth, flashlight aimed inward, voice ready to cut through the noise. Inside, the corridor swallowed the storm sounds and replaced them with something worse. Water. A steady, creeping movement. Not rushing yet, but present in every surface, slicking every step. The trickle Ethan had heard earlier had become a thin stream running ankle-deep along the channel's center. Ethan swept his flashlight beam down the corridor. The concrete walls glistened. The air was colder, the humidity thick enough to feel like a hand on the throat. Shadow moved ahead with purpose, nose low, then high, recalibrating. Maria's boots splashed behind. Lena's light stayed fixed on Shadow's body language. Watch his ears, Lena murmured. He's already reading pressure changes. Ethan didn't respond. He was listening for anything that wasn't water. They reached the first access panel, the one Ethan had opened earlier. It hung ajar like an exposed nerve. The cavity behind it was empty now, except for a damp residue and the memory of that taunting note. You think you're the first to try? Ethan's jaw tightened. Shadow passed it without stopping. He didn't care about the place where evidence had been taken. He cared about where evidence still lived. Shadow stopped 20 feet farther down at a low seam where the concrete shifted. He sniffed, then turned and looked at Ethan, eyes direct, a single silent instruction. Here. Ethan knelt and aimed the beam at the seam. Nothing obvious. Then he saw it, an old maintenance bracket, rusted, half hidden under mineral stains. The bracket held a rectangular plate. Ethan pried it. The plate came free with a wet pop. Inside, darkness in a small cavity. He reached in and felt plastic, thick, tightly wrapped. He pulled it out. A bundle, sealed in layers, heavier than the pouches before. Lena's breath caught. That's not a note. Ethan didn't answer. He slid it into Lena's gloved hands. Lena inspected it quickly. Multiple items, paper, maybe a drive. Maria's voice was tight. We're not done. Shadow was already moving again, further, deeper. The corridor sloped down slightly, and the water deepened to mid-shin. The current strengthened, pressing against Ethan's legs, making each step more deliberate. Water's rising, Lucas's voice echoed faintly from the entrance. You've got 10 minutes, maybe less. Ethan didn't look back. Copy. Shadow's pace didn't change, but his body tightened, reading the urgency through the environment. He stopped at a metal door embedded in the right wall, an old corridor junction door that looked sealed shut with age and corrosion. Shadow sniffed at the base. Then he pawed once, firm. Ethan bent, aiming the flashlight down. Water lapped at the door's lower edge. There's a gap, Maria said, spotting it. Bottom seal is compromised. Lena's voice was analytical. If someone bolted a cache above high water line, it would be behind a secondary barrier like that. Ethan tested the handle. It didn't move. He tried again, harder. Nothing. He looked at Maria. You got tools? Maria produced a small pry bar from her jacket, as if she'd been born with it. Always. Ethan took it, wedged it at the hinge seam, and leaned his weight in. Metal screamed. The door didn't open, but it shifted. Shadow barked once, sharp, urgent. Ethan's gut tightened. Again, he pried harder. Maria braced the doorframe. Lena held the light steady, rainwater dripping from her sleeves. The hinge finally gave with a pop. The door swung inward 2 inches, and a surge of water pushed through the gap like a fist. It wasn't a flood yet, but it was pressure, a warning. The river was forcing itself into every weakness. Ethan shoved the door open fully. Beyond it was a narrower passage, higher ceiling, with rusted pipes along the walls and old conduit boxes like dead insects clinging to concrete. The water here was slightly shallower, for now. Shadow entered first, moving with certainty. Ethan followed. Maria and Lena squeezed in behind. The moment they were inside, the outer corridor's water surged again, slapping against the door like something trying to break in. Lucas's voice echoed, strained. Water just jumped. Ethan, you've got 5 minutes. Ethan's voice stayed steady. Understood. Shadow moved down the passage and stopped at a point where the concrete wall had a bulge, an old reinforced section. He sniffed, then lifted his head, nose pointing upward. Not down. Up. Ethan followed the line of Shadow's attention. Above shoulder height, near the reinforced section, a small metal cabinet sat bolted into the wall, its lock rusted but intact. It was positioned above the current water line, high enough that even a surge wouldn't immediately reach it. High water line, Lena whispered, almost reverent. It's exactly where you'd put it. Ethan reached up and tested the cabinet door. Locked. He didn't have time to be gentle. He pulled his knife and jammed it into the lock seam, twisting with brutal precision. Metal resisted, then snapped. The cabinet popped open. Inside, a sealed waterproof container, thick plastic, military grade, with a faded label on top. Ethan's flashlight beam caught the label. Veteran Aid Oversight do not store in city archives. If found, deliver to Captain M. Hayes. Maria went still. Her name, typed, her title. She stared at it like she'd just been handed a prophecy. How? Lucas's voice crackled faintly through the corridor, though he wasn't on a radio. He'd been shouting into the tunnel. How is my captain's name on that? Ethan didn't answer, because the answer wasn't safe. It implied this cache had been prepared for this moment, that someone had anticipated Maria Hayes as a person who would not flinch from truth, that the machine had been running longer than any of them had realized. Lena lifted the container carefully, as if it weighed more than plastic. "Get out," Maria said, voice tight. "Now." Shadow's ears snapped toward the door. Ethan listened. A new sound had joined the water. A deep groan, like concrete settling under pressure. Then another, closer. The outer corridor door shuddered as the surge hit again. Ethan's heart punched once. "This place is filling," he said. They turned back. Shadow led. The moment they stepped into the outer corridor, the water was higher, knee-deep now, moving fast. The current wasn't a stream anymore. It was a push. Ethan felt it tug at his boots. The corridor's slope was now a trap, feeding water deeper. Lucas's voice from the entrance was tight with panic. "Ethan, it's rising fast. 2 minutes!" They moved. Not running. Running would slip. But fast, purposeful. Shadow's paws found traction in the wetness. He moved like the corridor belonged to him. Maria clutched the sealed container to her chest. Lena carried the smaller bundle against her side, keeping it high. Ethan stayed between them and the water's strongest pull. Halfway to the drainage mouth, the lights, flashlights, flickered as if the air was thickening. Then a sound slammed into the corridor. A loud crack. Concrete fractured somewhere ahead, and suddenly the ceiling above the corridor's midsection dropped a foot, debris cascading down, splashing into the water. A collapse. Not full, but enough to choke the passage. Shadow barked once, sharp warning. Ethan's flashlight beam caught broken rebar like ribs, and the water surged harder, forcing itself through the narrowed space with violent urgency. "Go!" Ethan shouted, and his voice echoed off concrete like a gunshot. Maria and Lena moved first, ducking under the lowered ceiling. Ethan followed, one hand bracing the wall. Shadow tried to slip through, and the next surge hit. A heavy piece of debris shifted underwater and slammed into Shadow's hind leg. Shadow yelped, brief, sharp. Ethan's chest went cold. "Shadow!" Ethan lunged, grabbing the harness. The current tugged at the dog's body. Shadow tried to plant his paws, but the water was too strong. Ethan's muscles locked into action. No thought, just force. He shoved his shoulder against the debris, straining, the pressure of the water roaring against him. His boots slid. He dug in, teeth clenched. Maria shouted from ahead, voice raw. "Ethan!" Lena's voice cut through, panicked for the first time. "The water is accelerating. Ethan, you have seconds." Ethan didn't answer. Shadow's eyes were wide but focused, trusting Ethan completely, even as the corridor tried to steal him. Ethan heaved. The debris shifted an inch, then another. Shadow pulled his leg free with a sharp jerk and stumbled forward. Ethan grabbed him by the harness strap and pushed him ahead. "Move!" Ethan barked. Shadow obeyed instantly, limping but moving. Ethan ducked under the lowered ceiling, water slamming his thighs, and for a heartbeat he felt the corridor's pull, like a hand trying to drag him backward into darkness. Then Lucas's flashlight beam cut through from the mouth, bright, frantic. "Here!" Lucas yelled, grabbing Maria's arm, hauling her upward. Lena followed, scrambling out as the water surged toward the drainage cut like a living thing. Ethan shoved Shadow up first. Shadow leapt, claws scraping metal, and Lucas grabbed the harness, hauling the dog out. Ethan climbed next, forearms burning, boots slipping on slick concrete. The current grabbed him at the ankle. He kicked hard, forcing his leg free, and surged upward, fingers gripping the edge of the opening. Lucas grabbed Ethan's wrist and yanked. Ethan hit the gravel hard, chest heaving. The moment his boots cleared the opening, Maria slammed the grate down. Not perfectly, not sealed, but enough. Enough to slow the river's reach into their world. They stood in the rain, soaked and shaking, the storm screaming around them. Shadow limped in a tight circle, then sat beside Ethan, chest heaving, eyes locked on him like a question. "Are we still together?" Ethan dropped to his knees and pulled Shadow close, hands checking the leg, feeling for fracture. There was swelling, pain, but no bone protruding. Shadow's breath came fast, but steady. "You did it," Ethan whispered into the dog's wet fur. "You did it." Shadow pressed his head against Ethan's chest. Maria stood over them, clutching the sealed container like it was a newborn. Lena's hands trembled as she kept her bundle dry under her jacket. Lucas stared at the floodwall, eyes wide, voice barely audible. It tried to drown it. Ethan looked up, rain running down his face. "Yes," he said quietly, and it failed. They didn't go to the station. They went to the only place that mattered now, a clean room, a controlled table, and the people who would keep chain of custody unbreakable. In Lena's workspace, Maria set the sealed container down carefully, hands still shaking. Lena opened it with surgical attention. Inside were folders, thick waterproof sleeves filled with documents. Photocopies, originals. Some typed, some handwritten, all marked with variations of the same header. Disaster relief, veteran aid oversight, audit discrepancy reports. A flash drive sat in the center, wrapped in wax paper and plastic. Lucas stared. That's modern. Lena nodded. Someone updated the cache later, or someone wanted it accessible now. Maria's voice was low, controlled, and it's addressed to me. Ethan stood behind Shadow, who lay on a blanket, legs swollen, breathing slow now that the adrenaline was leaving. Ethan's hand stayed on Shadow's shoulder, steady pressure. Maria lifted one folder and flipped through it. Her face hardened with each page. Vendor lists, contractor payouts, redirection charts, names blacked out, but not all of them. Some signatures visible enough to leave no doubt. Lena plugged the flash drive into an isolated laptop. Files opened, scans, photographs, a timeline, and, most damning of all, an internal memo trail showing deliberate suppression of audits and reclassification of records into unrelated infrastructure archives. Lucas swallowed. They hid veteran money inside floodwall paperwork. Maria nodded slowly. Because no one audits concrete once it's poured. Lena's voice was quiet. But paper remembers. Ethan spoke, calm and cold. Now it's official. Maria looked at him. Not yet. She pulled out her phone and opened a secure channel. Internal affairs, she said, voice clipped. Then she hesitated, jaw tightening. No, she corrected herself. State level. She tapped another contact. Lena's eyes flicked up. If you go state, you bypass local contamination. Maria nodded. Exactly. She began speaking, giving only facts, chain of custody, and immediate location. No emotion, no narrative, no room for anyone to label this as a traumatized cop's obsession. Ethan watched her and felt something unfamiliar. Relief, not peace, but a weight shifting. When Maria ended the call, she looked at Ethan. They're coming, she said. State investigators, not our people. Lucas exhaled hard, like he'd been holding his breath for hours. We did it? Maria's eyes softened just slightly. We started it. Lena closed the laptop and sealed the drive and documents back into evidence packaging, now labeled with formal codes she'd generated. Once this enters the state pipeline, Lena said, it becomes harder to erase. Not impossible, but harder. Ethan looked down at Shadow. Shadow's eyes were open, tracking him even through pain. Ethan whispered, we kept it from drowning. Shadow's tail thumped once. Morning came gray and wet, and with it came unmarked state vehicles in the riverfront lot, investigators moving with professional distance. Maria handed over the container personally, her signature steady. Lena provided validation notes, paper and ink analysis plans, film development requests. Lucas gave his archive folder with trembling hands. Ethan didn't speak much. He didn't have to. His role was simple now, witness and protector. They took Shadow to a vet once the adrenaline wore off. No dramatics, no speeches. Just Ethan sitting on the floor beside Shadow's table while the veterinarian wrapped the leg and checked for fracture. Sprain, the vet said. Bad one. He'll limp for a while, but he's lucky. Ethan nodded, fingers still on Shadow's fur. He's always lucky, Ethan murmured, and Shadow's eyes blinked slow. Weeks later, the city held a press conference. Not because it wanted to, because it had to. Maria stood in uniform at the edge of the stage, jaw clenched, while state investigators presented the timeline. Misallocated veteran relief funds, suppressed audits, records relocated and buried in infrastructure archives. Names were named, not all of them at first, but enough. Lena testified with calm precision, explaining how documents were authenticated and how the cache's placement above high water line showed deliberate preservation against flooding. Lucas sat in the second row, hands clasped tight, trying not to look like a kid. Ethan stood in the back. Shadow sat beside him, leg braced, eyes scanning the room, ears rotating like radar. When the reporter questions got sharp, when someone asked whether Ethan's leave status compromised the integrity of the find, Maria's voice cut like steel. Officer Cole followed procedure once evidence was confirmed, she said. And this department is grateful he did, because the alternative would have been silence. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't look proud. He looked lighter. After the press conference, a small group of veterans approached him outside the municipal building. They didn't ask for autographs. They didn't treat him like a hero. They just stood there and nodded, one by one. An older man extended a hand. "Thanks," he said simply. Ethan shook it. "You shouldn't have had to wait this long." The man's mouth tightened. "We waited anyway." Ethan looked down at Shadow. Shadow leaned into his leg. Ethan's hand rested on Shadow's head. "Not anymore," Ethan said quietly. "Justice isn't a showdown. It's a disciplined chain of custody built by people and dogs who refuse to let truth drown twice."